It is really lovely to see you all. And a few minutes ago, I wouldn't have been able to see you all because there'd been a power cut and the lights were all off. So it's really lovely to see you. But also just great to have you here for Sangha Night this evening. So we've got a theme which is wisdom beyond words. And I thought at this stage I'd also let you know there's a book which could accompany this theme. It's in the bookshop, Wisdom Beyond Words. I'll say more about it later on if I remember. I'll put it back down. And I wanted the image of the Buddha here to start with because the Buddha meditating and breaking through experiencing a radical, different form of consciousness. That's where Buddhism begins, that's where Buddhism began. The Buddha's wisdom, or Bodhi, this experience of, he described it as waking up, being awake from a dream. And I think an image is better because it's beyond words, that's the whole point. The wisdom of the Buddha is beyond words. Words can't capture it, they can't describe it. They can give us clues, they can point towards it, but the wisdom of the Buddha is beyond logic and beyond words. So images sometimes convey that experience of the Buddha, perhaps better than words could. And I love this image of the Buddha meditating and just kind of imagine what kind of state of consciousness had he broken into, had he woken up into. So maybe, you can gaze at that image of the Buddha. If the talk gets a bit dull, you can look at the image of the Buddha and just contemplate what state might the Buddha have broken into. The Buddha said the wisdom, his insight was hard to perceive. The wisdom of the Buddha was hard to perceive, hard to understand, calm, sublime, beyond logic, subtle, intelligible only to the wise. So if it's beyond logic and intelligible only to the wise, if we think we understand it completely, we've got it wrong. We're not going to understand logically the Buddha's wisdom because it's beyond logic and intelligible only to the wise. So this series has been, then the Buddha had a choice, and the Buddha chose to try to communicate something of his wisdom, something of that state, so that other people could experience that for themselves. He had a vision of humanity being like this vast pool of lotuses, all at different stages of growing and opening. So some of the lotuses were down in the mud, some of them had started to grow towards the light, towards the surface. Some of the lotuses were outside of the surface and starting to open into the sunlight and to blossom as flowers. And the Buddha thought he had another image as well. Some beings have just got a little bit of dust in their eyes, which can be removed, and they'll be able to see what I can see. So what the Buddha could see, his experience was, he couldn't put into words, but he realized he could use words to help people to grow, like these lotuses, to grow and experience it for themselves, open into that sunlight and see what the Buddha had seen for themselves. So the Buddha's teachings and the practices of Buddhism, the Dharma, are the tools and the concepts the Buddha came up with to help us to grow so that we could see it for ourselves, what he saw, to experience it for ourselves. And he gave us, there are concepts. The Buddha used concepts, he used metaphor, he used similes, but the Buddha definitely used concepts, and there are some very helpful and robust and useful concepts that the Buddha gave, which point towards what we experience and help us to make sense of our experience of the world from our position and to move towards a state where we can experience it for ourselves, what the Buddha experienced. And we used the metaphor back in week 1, when we opened the series, of having a map. We need to have a map to navigate through life. And usually the maps that were offered by society, by the world, they don't work so well. They don't help us to navigate our way through life. We kind of bump into things, we suffer. They don't really explain our experience. The ideas that we get presented with, they can't really explain. They're not that reliable and robust. Whereas the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, give us a map that really works, really help us to navigate through life successfully without, suffering less, and help us to grow But the crucial thing is it's only a map. The teachings and the concepts can't be confused for what the Buddha saw themselves. If we understand the teachings and the concepts, it doesn't mean we've understood what the Buddha understood or saw what the Buddha saw. They're a map, and the map is different from the territory. Having a really accurate and good map, it's still not the same as the experience of being in that place, in that territory, and experience it for ourselves. So the Buddha's, and I'll come back to this analogy later of the map and the territory. So the Buddha's wisdom was beyond words, but he gave us some very helpful concepts. And over the past few weeks, we've been exploring some of the Buddha's concepts. We've been looking at particularly the concept of conditionality, conditioned co-production, and then a list of the 3 lakshanas, the 3 marks of conditioned existence, which follow out of the Buddha's teaching of conditionality. We've been exploring those over the past few weeks. And I thought a helpful way for me to try and just recap this or explain this would be another metaphor. And I was really lucky. At the weekend, I went to the City Hall and I watched a classical concert for the first time in quite a long time, maybe a few years. And I watched the Manchester Camerata and the Sheffield Philharmonic Chorus performing a really beautiful concert, actually. And while I was sitting there really enjoying, delighting in this music, I thought, this might be a helpful way to explain the 3 lakshanas and conditionality. That this music is beautiful, but to begin with, it's all the different parts of it. It's co-arising. It's being co-produced by the conductor, by the different instruments, by me listening to the people in the audience. It's something that's just arising, and it's constantly in flux. The notes, the pieces, the music is constantly changing. There's nothing really that you can grasp onto, hold onto. Nothing about it is staying the same. It's constantly changing. And it's produced by all these different conditions coming together, all these different parts, all these different instruments, all these different people in the audience, my ears, them performing. So there's nothing there you can kind of hold and say, that's what the music is. And I guess you've got the notes which describe the music, but the notes on the paper aren't the same as the beautiful music that was created. And I thought, it's really beautiful, and you can't capture it. You couldn't describe that in words and say this is what the music is. And I'm trying to, but you had to be there. It was a really beautiful concert, and it was marked by the lakshanas. You couldn't pin it down. It's constantly changing. It was made up of these parts. There's nothing that you could kind of separate out and say, well, this is what the music is. And yet it was there, and it was real, and it was beautiful. So of the 3 lakshanas is impermanence, insubstantiality, and dukkha. There's one key one that I want to draw out this evening, and we'll come back to, which is anatta. So this was the Buddha refuting a teaching at the time that was popular at the time of atta or atman, that we have a fixed, and everything has a fixed essence that doesn't change. It makes us who we are, or makes things what they are, atman. And this was associated with Brahmanism, which later became Hinduism, the sense of almost like a soul, a fixed essence that doesn't change, and things existing separately from each other and having this fixed essence, atman. And the Buddha taught anatman. An means no, so no atman. There's nothing fixed. There's nothing fixed and separate about ourselves or about anything. And the implication of that is that we are kind of mysteriously and deeply interrelated and conditioning each other in relationship with everything around us. We're not separate. We're not fixed. We're not separate. So there's a teaching of an atman, one of the lakshanas. And because there's just this kind of flow, this flux of events that are constantly changing, like this beautiful music of life, there's this flow of events constantly changing, constantly conditioning each other in relationship with each other. Language can't do justice to that. As soon as we kind of use a word to say, to just arbitrarily break up part of reality and say, well, that's this is the lectern, that's the microphone, that's me, that's Sangha-gita. But once we use language and nouns to break things up, we've moved away from that flow. It can't, suddenly that's different. That's abstracted from that flow of change and of conditionality. So an implication is that language and concepts, as I've already said, can't capture, can't describe, can't fully capture and describe reality. So there's these two key strands from the Buddha's teaching. And my friend Savanagarbha pointed me towards a sutta from the Pali Canon where the Buddha describes the middle way between two extremes of falling into. So the Buddha said, I'll read it out. To summarize this sutta, the Buddha says, everything exists. That's one extreme. Everything doesn't exist. That's the second extreme. Avoiding these two extremes, the Buddha teaches the Dharma in the middle, the Dharma via the middle. So the Buddha taught a middle path between these two extremes of everything existing and having anatta, and everything not existing, which we could call nihilism. And the Buddha taught a middle path, which is these constant flow of events, reality arising and conditioning the other events, and constantly changing, and this beautiful music of life, to keep coming back to that metaphor, this middle path. But and the Buddha died. We have the Parinirvana festival on Sunday, which we heard about, and we'll hear about the final words of the Buddha emphasizing with mindfulness and vigilance, strive on. And you can say, it's through mindfulness we can pay attention to reality, to our experience, and see those marks, see everything changing, see that there isn't anything we can grasp onto. So it's through mindfulness we can see this beautiful music of life, of reality. But over time, what seems to have happened is this kind of radical view of life and this radical path that the Buddha taught started to change, started to become more comfortable and fossilized. The teachings became a bit hardened to be taken literally. And the path of the follower of the Buddha became a bit of a career choice. It's kind of a comfortable choice. You could become a scholar and you could study these and live quite comfortably studying these teachings of the Buddha. And but the Buddha taught lists, obviously lots and lots of lists, because it was an oral tradition, it wasn't written down. And some of the lists were practices that you could contemplate and meditate on to try and produce and try and help you into this state of experiencing what the Buddha experienced, to try and break down our sense of being separate from the world, break down this sense of a separate fixed self. So we have lists and meditation practices, but over time, some of these lists they got confused for actual descriptions of reality. This is how reality actually is. So people started to confuse the ideas about reality for the wisdom of the Buddha. I've got different bits of paper, and they've got different sections of teachings and quotes. So the teachings that we have in words, we're seen as actual descriptions of the nature of reality. And then knowledge about these concepts began to become confused with the direct experience that the Buddha had. So the words became the wisdom. It became kind of fossilized, and the words became taken literally. And the methods became dogma, and people thought the methods that the Buddha taught actually did describe reality. The different lists described reality, and there was a list even of there's a list of dharmas, and the dharmas became to be seen as like irreducible parts of reality. In a way, Atman, they became like fixed essences. So Buddhism had gone wrong. It had taken a wrong path, and all the ideas had become taken literally, and the teachings had become taken literally, and Buddhism had taken a wrong turn. So Buddhism needed it needed to be shaken out of that, smashed out of that, and it needed a new teacher to do that. So around about 100 of the Common Era, 100 kind of AD, I think we say, don't we? 100 of the Common Era. A new set of teachings, or different teachings, started to circulate, to be taught, the Pranya Paramita teachings, which Paramita means from the beyond, and Pranya is wisdom, the wisdom from the further shore, the wisdom from the beyond. And they were associated with a teacher, a famous Buddhist teacher called Nagarjuna, and he's thought to have lived around 150 of the Common Era. And if I can find my different quotes and bits of paper, because I've got lots of them. Bear with me. Here it is. So yeah, Sangharakshita describes Nagarjuna in this way. He says, by shattering the hard shell of literalism in which Buddhism was then imprisoned, Nagarjuna not only saved it from suffocation and probable death, but gave it room for future development. So Nagarjuna came along and smashed open this hard shell of literalism that had kind of encased and was suffocating Buddhism, and broke it open again. And he returned back to this middle way, because in a way people have gone back to the extreme of things existing. There's an extreme of not existing and an extreme of existing. And Nagarjuna broke that literalism open again. And he formed a school called the Majjhimaka, which was the middle way. And he took that from this sutta of the Buddha describing this middle path between these two extremes. So Nagarjuna broke things back open again. And he picked up these two key teachings of there being, well, no essence in anything, no fixed essence in anything or in anyone, and the inability of language and concepts to describe reality. These are two of the key teachings from the Prajnaparamita Suttas. And we're going to hear extracts from the suttas next week and the week after. And there's some and if you want to know more, you could get this book from the bookshop, Wisdom Beyond Words, which explores three of these Prajnaparamita Sutras: the Heart Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, and another one, the Ratnaguna Samchayagata Sutta. So three perfection of wisdom sutras, wisdom beyond words, associated with Nagarjuna. And there's lots of myths and legends associated with Nagarjuna. It's said that he was one legend says that he was presented the teachings by Nagas. And Nagas are mythical creatures in Buddhism, in Indian mythology. And it said that the Nagas, similar to kind of dragons, were guarding the treasure in the depths of the ocean. Until human minds were ready for these teachings, they were looking after these teachings. And when Nagarjuna emerged, he was presented with these teachings by a Naga princess. So that's one legend about how these teachings, the perfection of wisdom teachings, arose. You could say energies from the depths of Nagarjuna's consciousness, or from, maybe literally it did happen. Creatures from the depths presented him to the teaching. Maybe energies from the depths of his mind, who knows? Sangharakshita also speculates, or maybe there's a community of practitioners just keeping these teachings secret in a way for people and passing them down to people who are able to understand them from generation to generation. Maybe that's who the Nagas were. So there's, who knows what happened. But sometime around 150, Nagarjuna was propagating and teaching the perfection of wisdom sutras, and these texts survive. There's copies of the Heart Sutra, the Diamond Sutra survive. Some of the oldest texts known to man, to humans, are some of these sutras. Okay, back to my notes. Yeah, and now wisdom from the beyond, wisdom from the further shore, wisdom from beyond. One of the things the perfection of wisdom sutras delight in doing is setting up paradoxes. In a way, they set up these paradoxes that just confuse the mind, stop us from taking things literally. The rational mind gets confused and maybe a bit annoyed. You might find yourself getting annoyed by some of the verses in the coming weeks. Watch out for that. And that's the design to do that, you could say, to baffle the logical mind, to stop us trying to figure things out and pin things down and take things literally. And then it cracks things open. The experience then becomes open for us to enter into slightly more magical, mysterious experience. So the sutras are quite wacky, quite strange, and they delight in these paradoxes, baffling the rational mind. But one key teaching is shunyata from Nagarjuna and the Prajnaparamita. Shunyata was another way in which the Buddha used also, but to describe emptiness, this lack of fixed essential nature of either people or things. And he used it to cut through concepts as well. The concepts that we used to describe things and we take too literally, the words that we use, the language we use, which kind of points to our experience and can't capture it, and we take literally. Nagarjuna smashes that open as well and says they're empty. He describes them as mere play words. They're play words. And you can see this happening. We need language to describe our experience. but we confuse the words and the concepts for what's actually happening. This is hard to describe. Let's see if I can do it. By the way, there's a very good Mitra study module, Dharma training course module that Bodhinaga's written called The Middle Way in Search of the Mahayana Perspective. And if you want to learn more, you can study that as well, which I've been borrowing some of this from. So Nagarjuna claimed that he didn't have any view of his own, but his purpose was to show that all the views anybody could come up with were riddled with inconsistencies. So for Nagarjuna, all of the views that we come up with about the world are to do with kind of labeling incorrectly things and then creating stories, proliferation, prapancha about those labels. And he called them mere play words. The way we describe things he's called play words. And we have these kind of false conceptual constructions. He called them castles in the air, kind of these castles that you can't grab onto, they don't really exist. But I suppose if you reflect, if you think of examples in your life, you could probably think of, see what Nagarjuna's pointing towards. I had a taste of this last night, and I'm sure we do this every day, but last night I woke up and I was anxious. I was really anxious about this talk, and I couldn't sleep. And I was thinking about this talk, and I was kind of constructed an idea of what the experience of giving the talk was going to be like. And then my mind started to proliferate. It started to create a story. It started to create a whole reality. And it had consequences. I was living in that, and it was creating anxiety for me. And it carried on through the night. It carried on in the morning. And I went to the school and to drop my kids off at school. And I thought about the teachers and the stress of their life. And then I thought, my life's not stressful. I work at a Buddhist centre and I'm going to be giving a talk to really kind people. It's not going to be stressful. And the sun was shining. And then I thought of Nagarjuna's teachings. I thought, oh yeah, I've just made this all up. I've just constructed all of this. And all of this anxiety I've constructed, and it's not real. So that was a really powerful example for me of how we can construct stories. And they affect us. We become anxious about things, or we really desire things that we've constructed and we crave them. So it might be, we imagine qualities that these things we've constructed have. So it might be, an idea in our mind of a particular smartphone we're going to get, or a particular app that's going to change our lives, or a new partner we're going to get, or a promotion at work, or something we're going to change. We construct this idea and then we desire it and we crave it. And that has consequences that really affects us. So we construct these ideas about reality and then we add layers and layers of construction. And Nagarjuna says, well, the ideas themselves are play words. The constructions are like castles in the air, but it all has consequences. Yeah, and so Vedanya says, well, we have these constructions and we imagine qualities that we attribute to things, and to cap it all off, we get lost in this world of verbal fictions and mental constructs, experiencing craving for imagined qualities of things like this car, this computer, this shirt, this person, or we get anxious or upset about imaginary things like reputation, success, fashionability, approval, security. They're all ideas, they're all play words, but we create these big castles of sky, of air around them, and we get caught up in them. And Nagarjuna and his teaching is trying to break that open. And also, there's the stories we tell about other people. And I had a powerful experience of that as well this week. A story I've been telling about a friend, another person, and really been living in it and dwelling inside it, and experiencing resentment, fear, anxiety towards another person, and then spot it and think, oh, I've just created that. I've just made this story up. And it's just a story. And so the Metta-bhavana practice helps us to spot some of the stories we've created about other people, the labels, the false labels, and kind of crack them open. So these teachings, they're really powerful, really helpful. And then there's the story about ourself, that I exist separately from the world. I have a fixed essence, it doesn't change. I exist separately from you, you're out there. And the things in the world, I have to compete with you for things in the world. I have to compete with you to get the last bit of cake, or be ahead of you in the queue for a cup of tea at break time or something. I'm in competition with other things, you out there. And it's an idea, but it's a powerful idea. And I was reflecting about how powerful the idea is, how much of my thoughts are self-referential, or just thinking about myself, my emotions are self-referential, the way the view of the world is self-referential. We have this very powerful view of ourselves at the center of things, at the center of the universe, and everything is self-referential. So this is a really powerful idea that Nagarjuna and these teachings are trying to, and the Buddha as well, to break open. And then there's the teachings of the Dharma. Nagarjuna was ruthless with the teachings of the Dharma. And the Heart Sutra, which we'll hear about in a couple of weeks' time, just goes through all of the lists, all of the famous teachings, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the lists of our senses, our consciousness, and just says they're empty. They're all empty. That's empty. Even, feeling, sensing, eye, nose, mouth. They're all ideas. It's quite radical and difficult. Well, you can't understand it. The whole point is it's beyond logic, but it just blows open the sense that we understand things. And then when either it's an idea about the world, an idea about ourselves or the people or the Dharma, when that's broken open, when it breaks open, there's space for us to, or something new to arise, a new experience, a different experience, or to get closer to what's actually happening. So we need to break open that literalism and these ideas, these play words. And that's what the Perfection of Wisdom teachings do, the Prajnaparamita texts. And it's what the Buddha did. It goes back to what the Buddha was teaching. As I mentioned in the first week of the series, the first talk, there's a danger, though, inherent in these ideas. And Nagarjuna recognised these ideas could be really dangerous if taken the wrong way. And maybe that's why they were kept secret. Maybe that's why they're preserved until humans are ready for them. And we're probably not ready for them. I'm not ready for them, I don't think. So we have to, if they're taken the wrong way, they could be dangerous. And again, let me find the right bit of paper. Yeah. So in Nagarjuna's own words, a wrongly conceived shunyata can ruin a slow-witted person. It's like a badly seized snake or a wrongly executed spell. So I remember I gave this quote in the first week, and at that point I wasn't sure what the wrong way to pick a snake up is. I've done some research today to find out what is the correct way to pick up a snake. This isn't really connected with the Prajnaparamita, but just to kind of tidy up a loose end. Apparently, if you wear gloves and make sure the snake isn't venomous, and you shake a stick towards its head, you can pick the snake up by its tail. If you try and pick the snake up by its head, it'll bite you. So this makes sense of what Nagarjuna was saying. If you try and pick up the snake by its head, it'll bite you. If you pick up these teachings the wrong way, it's like being bitten by a poisonous snake. It will cause a lot of damage. And the wrong way to pick up these teachings would be to fall into the extreme of nihilism. These teachings have been taught and presented to crack open the extreme of eternalism, of things existing and being fixed. But you could also fall into the opposite view of nothing exists. And at the time of the Buddha, there's a very strong sense of Atman. That's what everyone believed in. So just breaking that open was really helpful. There was also the Abhidharma, these lists that were taken literally of what everything was constructed of. That needed to be broken open. But one of our stories about the world is that the world is kind of a machine and it's dead, and it's kind of matter is what's primary. So if you introduce these teachings of no self, ideas just being play words, there's a danger of taking that the wrong way and thinking, well, nothing exists, I don't exist, nothing exists, there's no self, nothing exists, and getting ourselves into a real tangle with that, actually. And I've encountered people who have take this literally, this extreme view, there is no self. And the ideas of the Dharma, there's no self, so therefore there's no ethics, there's no karma, because there's no person doing the actions, so there's nobody who can be doing the actions and no consequences. And that, you're going to get yourself into a real tangle if you get the wrong, maybe at a certain level, that is true. And at our level, you're going to get yourself into a real mess if you practice like that and live like that. So to try and explain this, Nagarjuna had a teaching of two truths. He said there's two truths. There's the ultimate truth, which is that is beyond words, beyond logic, beyond concepts. And from the perspective of a Buddha, probably true to say, well, there's no self and no karma, maybe. But not from my perspective of not being a Buddha. That's dangerous. That's a dangerous teaching to live by and practice. There's also a conventional truth, which is the kind of level of truth we operate on and language operates on, and there's concepts. And that's also true. Conventional truth, the Dharma teachings are conventionally true. So going back to this analogy of a map and territory, the map isn't wrong, the map is right. The map of the Buddha's teachings is right, but it's not the same as the territory. We need so the teachings, to kind of refute the teachings and say, well, they're empty, disregard them, I don't need them, is a danger. And you get yourself into a real pickle if you start to go down that route of, well, the Dharma teachings are all empty. It'll be a nihilistic path with no kind of ethical values, no meaning in life. And then there's a danger of, well, the Buddha used a metaphor of having a raft. He said that my teachings are like a raft to take you to the further shore. So these teachings are from the further shore, Panyo Paramita. And we're at this shore, in our conditioned existence, suffering, not really understanding the world, getting things wrong. And the teachings of the Buddha, he said, are like a raft that you can use to travel across this kind of dangerous river of samsara of life and get to this further shore. And you need a really watertight raft. You need a raft. You need ideas that work, that are robust, that you can rely upon, and that you can really commit to this voyage. And you take the raft and you travel on it. So there's two things. You don't just think about the raft and talk about it and analyze it and stay on this shore. You use the teachings of the Buddha to change your consciousness so that we can progressively see things more like the Buddha saw. We can become more awake. So we use the raft, the teachings of the Buddha, to change ourselves. The teachings of karma. We can experience this just by practicing ethics. You can notice yourself changing, your consciousness changing. You're starting to use the raft to travel towards the further shore. So we need to do that. We need to take refuge in the teachings. We need to rely upon them, and we can do. They're like a seaworthy vehicle. Whereas some of the other ideas floating about, maybe they're not so watertight, not so reliable. These are ideas you can count on. But the Buddha said, when you get to the further shore, you don't need the raft anymore. You don't need those ideas and concepts when you can see things like the Buddha can see. But the danger would be, like, if you get the wrong end of the snake, might be to think, actually, I don't need the raft anymore. The raft is just arbitrary, it's just provisional, it's mere play words. And we kind of jump off the raft into the middle of the ocean and get ourselves into a tangle. We need to use the raft all the way to Buddhahood. We need that raft to travel to the further shore. So these are the dangers inherent potentially in Nagarjuna's teaching, that we go down this other route of things not existing. Nagarjuna's teachings were there to crack open the literalism. But we need to be careful not to fall into the idea, well, nothing exists and we don't exist and the teachings aren't necessary. I have met Buddhists who've fallen down that path. So take care not to do that. Okay. So we've got the middle way. Nagarjuna's taught the middle way between these two extremes. His school was called the Madhyamaka. And we're going to be hearing more about Nagarjuna's teachings in the weeks to come, and the perfection of wisdom teachings. This talk's really to set the context and maybe whet your appetite for those talks. But I thought, well, just to be clear, really clear that the Nagarjuna wasn't teaching a kind of nihilistic approach of no self, nothing existing. This school that Nagarjuna founded and was part of was really influenced the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism. So the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism was called like the second great tradition of Buddhism. And the emphasis on the Mahayana tradition was on altruism and compassion. It's on other people. It's called the Bodhisattva ideal, you might have come across. The ideal of the Bodhisattva who lives for other people. So the spirit behind Nagarjuna's teachings was of compassion and altruism, living for other people to benefit other people. So there's a big clue in that as to what the spirit behind Nagarjuna's teachings was. It's about deep connectedness with other people. And going back to this image to end with this image of the Buddha meditating under the tree, the Buddha described an experience at that time of, the word he used was anukampa, which means to tremble with and to quiver or resonate with. It's an expression of compassion. The Buddha trembled with the suffering of other beings. He resonated with this deeply, was affected deeply by the suffering of other beings. That was the experience of the Buddha. So Buddhism, what the state of the Buddha we're trying to get towards is of compassion, of a sense of being deeply connected with other beings. In a way, if you can crack open this experience of self, or this view of self of being at the centre of things and separate from other people, what breaks open is an experience of interconnectedness, a deep connectedness with other people. So you could say that, well, the way I like to see it is reality is empty of my ideas about it. My ideas of reality is empty of my ideas about it. And what's left, perhaps, is that beautiful music, the beautiful music that's just created by human interaction, the interactions of humans and the deep connectedness of humans, this beautiful music of life that is created of relationships. Relationships are really important to the Buddha. He emphasized friendship as being the whole of the path. So there is a final quote. If I can find it, I'll end with that one. Let's see if I can find it. Maybe I can't actually. Oh, here it is. Okay.
Yes.
So the metaphysics of the Prajnaparamita is in fact the metaphysics of the vision and the dream. And I'm just going to interject. That's the metaphor the Buddha used, remember, of waking up from a dream. So it's a universe of glittering and quicksilver change. It's precisely one that can only be described as empty. The vision and the dream become the tools we use to dismantle the hard categories that we impose on reality, to reveal the eternal flowing possibility in which the Bodhisattva lives.